Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Julia joins me to answer a question from two students who are twins from Rochester, Sapna and Sivan. We are going to answer one question on episode 547, and then they had a second question, which I'll take up next Monday on episode 548. Well, part 3 of Jen Mandel's interview which involves us taking a second question from a listener. This is from Diana from Idaho. And she wants to know if her student needs to go to a top 20 college to get a job on Wall Street. Jen joins me on that because she's got an interesting story to share. Finally, we have the final interview with Dr. Bob McMahan, the president of Kettering. But, we kind of finished up our Kettering sections on the first 4 parts. So this time we're talking about something completely different. I'm asking Bob, when you network with other college presidents, what is keeping them up at night these days? And Bob answers this question, and Bob goes on the hot seat.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hey, Julia.
Hi, Mark.
I'm in a good mood because we have students sending questions in.
It really made my day, especially because, school's out where I am, and it was so nice to hear from students.
I don't think they realize how much they tug on our hearts.
Totally.
Do you think it's everybody, or do you think it's kind of like us because we've chosen to go into this field, so we have a soft spot for this stuff?
I think we might be our threshold for what we find endearing is maybe lower in the right ways than other people.
Maybe. We're mushes.
Yeah.
Well, let's play the question so people know what we're talking about.
Hi, Mr. Stucker. I'm Sapna. And I'm Sivan. We're twins from upstate New York. We just finished our junior year. And our dad is an avid listener and never misses an episode. He often shares your content with us, and we have found it super helpful in our college process, so we thank you for that. We have a couple questions. First, can the additional info section of the Common App be used to further explain an activity or expand on a senior year capstone or research project, or is it just used for describing personal or extenuating situations? Secondly, recently my high school counselor recommended that when writing our activity descriptions under the activities section on the Common App, we should write them all ourselves and then can use AI to trim them down to make sure they stay below 150 characters. My question is about the use of AI in this situation because it feels wrong, but I was just wondering what your advice and opinion on the matter was. Thank you.
So awesome. And I love this question, and twins, and pretty cool. So thank you so much, Sivan. Let's take the first one, Julia. There are 2 different distinct questions here.
Yeah.
Why don't you start? What's so crazy? You're not going to believe this. I'm not kidding. A couple hours ago, I was going to text you and say, I think we need to talk about additional information. It's been a while since I had Amin Gonzalez come on and talk about it literally 5 years ago. And I really was thinking we should do a segment, and then voila, I go to SpeakPipe and there's a hot new question at the top.
Yeah.
So how do you want to answer this? why don't you start off, and I'll see if there's anything, that I can throw in that you don't say that I think.
Yeah. And I think, and we've talked about this a little bit, and I think we all have slightly different, maybe the same approach and purpose, but slightly different sort of ideas about what feels appropriate and right for this space. So just a caveat, I think the listeners know I come from a place where I'm really working with very privileged students who often have a lot of adults in their corner that have helped them craft a narrative of who they are and go to 1,000 very expensive camps and have these great experiences. So they just naturally, a lot of my students do feel like they have more that they want to share. And because my students do take up a lot of space in the college process, I'm just very wary about what I would have a student place in the additional information section. So I think it's great that the twins are asking this question, because I think if you're asking, you're probably going to fill out the section appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the time I would suggest using the additional information section outside of, as the twins outlined, sort of like extenuating circumstances, to use my former colleague Terry Solomon's saying, if life has gotten in the way of your transcript, that's something great to put in the additional information section. But beyond that, I would just say be really mindful. The times I do think about that is perhaps, the activities list in the Common App is quite small and not very forgiving. And you might have a extracurricular or two, or even a family responsibility or job or two that really does deserve more than the 50 characters. So in that sense, I do encourage sometimes students to elaborate. This is also true for some of my students who might have been very privileged to have some really in-depth research experiences too, or independent projects that again cannot be captured in 50 characters.
You mean 150 characters, but still like 30 words.
Sorry, 150 characters. Yes. So I encourage them to maybe put like a little blurb. But here's what I don't ever encourage.
Yeah.
You want to be good with the space, and they're shrinking that space, by the way. So I think that the additional information section might have been used a little too much by people. Yeah. So you want to, it is less words than it used to be. So you also want to be economical. What you should not be putting in that space is another essay just because you'd like to share one, or something that you might think is really important and needs greater explanation, but it's probably taken care of between your letters of recommendation, your essays, and your Common App activities list, or if you submit a resume. So I've had students sort of elaborate on an extracurricular to certainly talk about a research piece, or maybe extenuating circumstance with why they couldn't participate in a certain extracurricular, or had a specific choice of courses. And then Susan Tree brought up a really good one for me. Earlier this year, I had a student applying to NYU. And if you haven't applied to NYU, NYU allows you to list 2 of the colleges that you'd like to be considered for. But in the last few cycles, NYU has gotten rid of their question where they ask students, why do they want to study what they want to study? And I had a student who was going for a really niche major at NYU. And I was like, how are we supposed to tell NYU that like this is her fit and why she's looking? And actually, Susan had the great idea for her not to write in the additional information section, hey, NYU, this is what I want, but sort of articulate something about her that was lacking in other parts of her Common App that would show sort of her passion for a specific major or a specific area of study she was interested in. So normally I might not have actually, said that myself, but I'll say whether I'll never know what the answer is, but my student did get into NYU for that major. So I'd like to, think that, but I do want to say that admission officers don't often have time to read the additional information section, even if there's pertinent information in there. And then if you're going to give something that feels superfluous or sort of like braggy or very exercise in your privilege, it might hurt you. It might land badly on the reader. I will tell you this. I read applications. It lands badly on me. I will absolutely write that in my prose when I'm looking at an application. I'll be like, I'm really disappointed the student, kind of used this space to provide just more sort of bragging about themselves instead of, be economical with the space and let everything else speak for itself.
Yeah, I don't think we disagree much, maybe a little. The more you talk, the more I didn't. First, I thought, oh, I think we might disagree. But the more you talk, the more I don't think we did. And Susan's not here. Susan loves additional information. As a reader, she does. She loves it as both a reader and both sides of the desk. I like it too when used in a certain way. So what I'm going to say, I think, is almost exactly like what you said, but maybe slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
See, so, and a lot of counselors will say this. So there is explain and expand when you're thinking of additional information. So explain is addressing any flag that could be in the file that there's a legitimate reason for, right? Like your grades were pretty bad in fall of 10th, but your grandma passed away and you guys were really, really close. Like there's legitimate place for that without sounding like excuse making if it's done tactfully, or you were in the hospital forever or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It could be a class you never took because a teacher quit, or you were forced with a hard choice. It was going to be AP Physics or Calc, and they were offered at the same time. You chose Calc, and that's why you couldn't. Like those things to me are all, I would call all those things explain.
Yep.
Four schools in 4 years, discipline incident, like all those things. What I would put in explain category. Now you can't put it in the explain category. You just didn't try hard, or like there needs to be something legitimate, and then you might need some guidance on what's legitimate and what's not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But there are definitely things that are legitimate, and people are gracious and they're human and they understand, especially when it's clear that it's an outlier.
Right.
So you can't just say, well, those were my grades, why I had a low semester in 10th, but then I see the same thing popping up a couple more semesters,
Yeah.
And then especially if you've had your breakthrough and I can see upward trajectory. So that's the explain side. The expand side is what you said, which I actually really like to do. So there's an extracurricular that you have a lot of passion about, and you were frustrated that you had 150 characters. I'm thinking of a student I work with who's at Duke right now, who really got into bibliotherapy. Are you familiar with bibliotherapy?
No.
I didn't even know what it was until I met this student. Now I don't feel as dumb.
Is it just you get to read and it makes you feel better? Because
no, you know what it is? It's the therapeutic approach that uses books and other reading material to help people.
Okay.
So this person was all about reading. I mean, she did a great intellectual curiosity, personal statement about getting lost in the bookstore for 4 hours and and all that. It was really, really done well. But she really got into bibliotherapy, which was like helping preteens identify sort of self-help books to help them with their issues, and like a reading club and she really got into this. And this is something she started doing in 7th grade and did it all the way through 12th. So she was very frustrated by 150 characters.
Yep.
To explain all that. So she came over to additional information and elaborated. And I'm big on that because I look at it like it's a way to make something pop. It's like taking a big highlighter and underscoring it. Now, several things. One, I think there needs to be true passion.
Yeah.
And also, it's so important that in that section, you focus on your why. If you start going down lists of accomplishments like that,
yeah,
that's that braggy stuff. And that's what we always say, that's a flex in the writing. And we've talked before about that quite a bit. You and I, Julia, not a place to flex, because additional information really is kind of connected to personal statement. It's all part of that writing portion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it can be really great to sort of highlight something that you want to make pop in your application. But, and I used to say this to my students all the time, I almost did a backflip when they changed it from 650 to 300, because I used to be, do not use those full 650.
Right.
And I'm big on bullet points. I like bullet points on that. Yes.
That's the other thing. I think sometimes students also, I've had students who maybe wanted to talk about a learning difference they were diagnosed with in additional info, and they get so nervous. Is my writing good, Miss Esquivel? Like, is this, I'm like, oh no, we could just write in like, memes if you wanted to. The idea is the content, not necessarily like they're not checking this as an essay, right?
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I do feel that I haven't said this, and I want to make sure I'm clear on this. You are making people do extra work, and people are under pressure to read things quickly. So the bar is high. The bar is pretty high. That I want to learn. I want to learn something about you, and that thing that I learn about you should be important, and that should be the standard.
Yep.
It should not just be something that either wasn't significant or it's all over the application.
Yeah.
So I think it seems like we're pretty close. So don't you think, Julia?
Yeah. I think I'm probably a little pricklier than the average counselor about it. But yes, I think absolutely.
Do you think that you'll be less prickly now that it's 300 words, not 650?
Yes, I think that actually really does help me, because really where I'm coming from is like I said, a population that I think if they're given space will use it, and not in a way that I think is the intention of it. But I think having a much shorter space will just be really clear to them that that's not the intention of it, and it's also not meant to be, like I said, another essay for you to
no another essay, and they really should be learning something important. It shouldn't just be I had fun at Brown summer camp.
Right. Or like sometimes my students are like, oh, but I didn't talk about like my hobby of making playlists on Spotify. And I'm like, that is definitely something we do not need anywhere in your app.
See, I would say if there's a way that there's a twist that could be brought out that was related to a passion that you had, not just
totally.
Yeah. So to me, that would depend on that one.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of saying the same thing. Maybe I think you probably said it well. Maybe you're just a bit more prickly, but I think with the 300 words, if you had 300 words, bullet point, and you learned something about somebody that you felt, I'm glad they took the time to share it.
Totally. And that's maybe another 30 seconds to a minute of my reading time. So really not a huge impact. Yep.
And that's a big part of it. You're looking at partly through the context of how much time are you asking the admission officer to spend here? And, the more time, the higher the bar is.
Right.
So before we get into part 2 of the question, I just want to throw this out because I feel like if I don't, I might forget it. So there's obviously a brand new Challenges and Circumstances essay, 250 words, which is really kind of replacing was COVID, then it became community disruption.
Yeah.
But then every time when you look at the description, it's getting broader every year.
Totally.
With how they're defining it. So how are you telling your students to handle that, Julia? In some ways, there's similarities, right? Because you don't want to, community disruption. I got the flu in 10th grade and I missed 3 days of school. Sorry, the bar's higher than that.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think it's been really helpful in my preliminary conversations with students, and also as people know, I'm currently just working with 11th graders. So I have yet to watch a full cycle for the first time in a whole year. So obviously I'm speaking from what's currently going on. And so, for example, I had some students who, I'm at a school with a trimester system, and my international students who had maybe senior friends who were going to go to Harvard, who are international students, or they're coming from a country that just got a travel ban. I saw them tank in their finals at the end of a trimester because it just coincided with that news. And that would be something I would say for the students to talk about sort of this is something that did affect more than me, but uniquely affected me in these ways. But what I'm really finding also helpful about that question is, and I don't know if you're like this, Mark, I believe it or not, while some students can be pretty comfortable bragging about themselves, they can feel really uncomfortable being vulnerable. And I'll have a lot of students that maybe had a personal tragedy or also were maybe diagnosed with a learning difference, not wanting to disclose those things to colleges because they're afraid colleges will think that they're weak or unable to handle things. Where you and I both know on the other side, colleges have come a long way in understanding the mental health of teenagers. And in a way, the COVID question was really like, tell us what your school did and how that affected you in the moment. But the question lingers and morphs because we're still seeing significant mental health effects, right, from COVID. So to me, this is also a signal of like, and I see it in TV shows, I see it in my stepdaughter, like this generation has a much better vocabulary and familiarity and understanding of how life can get in the way of your ability to be a full student. And to me, I think the question is worded in a way that just captures a little bit more or is a little more explicit and makes my students feel a little bit more like, oh, hey, this was sort of like an unforeseen circumstance. This was something out of my control. This was like pretty negative and affected me in the following ways, and sort of kind of feeling the license to share that and not worry about like, oh, well, how will a college receive this? Because it's already been labeled by Common App as like, you let us know what happened that got in the way.
Yeah, I like the wording of it. I was just looking at it this year. I mean, I've been, that's obviously a prompt. That is prompt 2 from the 7 prompts. And so when it's looked like someone has maybe been a really good candidate for prompt 2, I've been saying, why don't we do challenges and circumstances with that and then talk about something else? And I was talking to another member of my staff, and we were just brainstorming and looking at the writing with one of the students that the counselor is working with. And the student has had more double-digit surgeries.
Oof.
But they kind of don't think it's any big deal. I'm like, no, that's something that's a big deal that any admission officer would want to know about. I said, that is a perfect challenges and circumstances.
Yep.
But it's not just listing all the dates, right? It's like what you learned. What you learned is really important, and you got to get what you learned in there from what you went through.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to do a little something on that because it's brand new. We're going to get questions galore on it.
Totally. Yeah. And it already tripped up some of my students because I was like, we're going through the Common App. And as I'm going through, I'm like, and before, especially my students are like, oh, well, you always tell me, Miss Esquivel, something's optional. I got to fill it out. Right.
Right.
So when they see that, they were a little thrown off by it.
I know. Friends, this concludes our answer to the first question from Sivan and Sapna. And we threw in a bonus discussion about the new challenges and circumstances essay. But they also have a second question. And because it's a student question, it gets prioritized. So I want to fast track it, and we'll actually play part 2 on Monday's episode. So I hope you join us on Monday for our answer to the second question from Sivan and Sapna, twins from New York State.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 3 of 4, Jen and I discuss a question from a listener from Diana from Idaho, who sent in a SpeakPipe question. And it perfectly lined up with the content that we were discussing, so we incorporated it into the interview. And Jen shares her own son's experience in relation to the question Diana from Idaho asks. Listen and enjoy. So the third thing I want to talk to Jen with also relates to a question that came in from a listener from the great state of Idaho. We love to get listeners from Idaho. So I'm going to play the question, and then I'm going to ask Jen to share her youngest son's experience, and then I'll chime in with some thoughts. So we'll both kind of answer this question together.
Hi there, this is Diana from Idaho. We've always just figured our son would go to college in the general area where we're from, which is the inland Northwest, and that we weren't too focused on super high prestige. However, he is very interested in high finance and has gotten the grades to be able to compete at that level. I'm wondering if it really is the case that kids need to go to a top tier school to be able to get a job on Wall Street post graduation period. We're in a situation where it would have to be full pay.
All right, Jen, why don't you talk about this question through the prism of your own son's experience?
Diana's question is good. I think listening to her, I can relate. I think when people are talking about Wall Street, oftentimes they're referring to investment banking. And although I can't speak to some of these top Ivy schools because I'm not a parent there. I can't relate to that. I do think there are different pathways to get there. I can only speak to my own child, who I've referred to a few times. Is I know was interested in that pathway, and we didn't even look at the Ivies. And as a matter of fact, he wasn't aware that was something he wanted to do when he went to college. And he joined one of those clubs at TCU that showed interest in investment banking once he started looking into business there. So that was at his school, which is a mid-sized school, TCU. I'm sure there are plenty of other schools that offer it. I know Wisconsin-Madison has clubs, and other schools as well that are not Ivies and not the top 20, that they have them as well. And I think there's different ways to go about it. These clubs can often a lot of times offer opportunities to go about the avenues to get there. And speaking of my son's own personal experience, he joined a club at his school for investment banking, and he joined that. He's a sophomore right now. He joined his sophomore year. He's still kind of a little bit on the front end of things, but he basically got a lot of mentorship this year. They assigned 2 mentors for him, a junior and senior mentor, who are both in the field of, they've been in the field of investment banking and a lot of the banking industry. So they provide mentorship. He's in a course that teaches them all about how to interview and prepare yourself for the investment banking interviews. If you are familiar with this career, you have to interview about 18 months ahead of time for these internships. So right now, if you're a sophomore, you're going to be interviewing for the internship junior year. It's about 18 months ahead of time. So I can't speak to how these other schools do it, but I know my son's school, this club/course prepared him for this sophomore year with the mentorship, the teaching, the professors, the alumni. They do a lot of mock interviews where alumni and mentors come in and they actually rate you and they score that. And these people who are rating you and scoring you work in the industry. He interviewed for this club at his school, and they did a lot of it. It was a club that was assigned with credit as a course. But again, you had to apply to get in, and it was competitive. Once he got into it, it was he met, I don't know if it was a nighttime course or whatever, but it was taught by a professor at the school who I think she has a lot of connections in the industry. So they bring in different mentors who are in investment banking. And the mentors, each student is assigned 2 different mentors, a junior and senior mentor that I referred to earlier. And they also do these trips where they go to different cities to tour banks. So they can maybe do Wall Street, maybe do Chicago. In my son's case, he went to Houston, and he, along with his professor and other students, visited multiple banks that students will be interviewing for investment banking jobs, or for internships. My bad, sorry. So they toured these banks earlier this year that they could interview for. So they gave them all these opportunities with mentors and professors and experientials to visit different cities. And then they spent a lot of time helping the students understand what the interviews take, how to prepare for the interviews, and really getting those technical questions, understand the technical questions. For the area in Houston, I know my son was more interested in the Houston area. He told me that Houston wasn't just the technical side of investment banking, but you also had to know the energy
about oil and gas. So he was really studying up a lot about oil and gas and the technical side of investment banking. This is a world I don't know much about, so I can't speak too much about the technical side of it. But he had a lot of coaching and mentoring through this club and course at his school, and ended up going through through the interview process, and he ended up landing a internship 18 months from now at an investment bank in Houston. He actually surprised himself and said he passed one of the interviews that he thought was known to be one of the most competitive interviews and hardest interviews, and that is where he will be doing his internship 18 months from now. As anybody who has a child in the business world knows, once you do your internship at some of these places, in some of these jobs, oftentimes you can hope that after you do your internship, the goal is that you will be there after graduation. There are no promises. Don't take anything for granted. But the goal is after you do your internship, if you do well there and they like you and you like them, oftentimes that means that you are hopefully able to work thereafter. So hopefully all things go well, but he definitely didn't go into any Ivy League school. He didn't even know he wanted to do investment banking. So that is something that was his pathway. I know when I talked to my son at Wisconsin-Madison, he has said that his friends are doing the same thing there. He has friends that are in investment banking and they have clubs there, and they are landing investment banking jobs just the same way. I can't speak to the clubs because that's not the club my son is in, but they're landing the same jobs in Chicago and New York and doing the same thing. So they are not landing at these top 20 schools.
And I wanted Jen to hear a story because I want you to hear Jen's story because there's nothing like the power of example. Like, there you go. There's an example of someone didn't go to top T20, quote unquote, T20 school. And once you get admitted into this program, clearly the school you attended is not a problem because now you're set up. And as long as it goes well, you get the job. They wouldn't be bringing people in. They had no interest in potentially hiring because they're looking to do a screening to make a permanent hire. And oftentimes it works out. And me knowing your son, I'll be very surprised if it doesn't work out for him because he's got the character traits that employers love. So once again, it oftentimes comes down to who you are as a person. Now, I do want to answer this question with some data and some other experiences. So most of the time when people say Wall Street, they really mean investment banking. And, whether it's Houston, Chicago, New York. The New York banks tend to be the most persnickety, I would say, about where they recruit from. They still don't just recruit from 20 schools, okay? I have a student from the University of Georgia from Cincinnati, landed an investment banking job with one of the big banks from the University of Georgia. Rutgers has a really good partnership with New York banks. So does CUNY Hunter. Okay, even Fordham. Like, now some of that's the local proximity and, you get to the connections and being local. That always happens in any place. So you don't have to do that. Now, having said that, of all of the people that recruit, I still would say the Wall Street world is the most name conscious of all of them. And statistically, your chances are better at one of those schools statistically. Now, part of that also, though, remember, is how selective it is to get into those places. So the kids that are already in there are rock stars. So it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like, how much of it was the school and how much of it was the kids that are at those schools are already so impressive that they stand out? You could argue that. But I thought I'd come with some data. And if you're really, really serious about this, there's a really good website that really gets into this stuff. It's called Wall Street Oasis. It has all kinds of data on schools and their feeders. It's not a free website. There's some free materials, but to get to the really good stuff, there's a fee, but it's a whole lot less money than paying for college if somebody wants to go check it out for a short period of time. Wall Street Oasis is the best source I know on that. But the best study I know on this was done by College Transitions. And they did a crazy study. It was updated in 2024. And I'm just going to read to you some things from this study. So this is what it says. This is, after all, a field where the most reputable players often draw from a small pool of elite schools, and where tapping into one of alumni's network can prove critical to the most desired jobs. To identify the top feeder institutions in the banking sector, they looked at publicly available data from LinkedIn. We identified and analyzed the undergraduate backgrounds of nearly 7,000 entry-level investment banking analysts across 15 of the most reputable banking firms, including PJT Partners, Goldman Sachs, Citi, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, Barclays, Guggenheim, Evercore, Greenhill and Company, Centerview, and list all of them. There's others as well. We then constructed two lists. The first looks at the raw number of alumni employed at these select companies. The second looks at the top 30 producers when adjusted for undergraduate enrollment, so that you're not just biasing the larger schools. Finally, we identified the top two employers for each feeder institution. The first top employer is the bank employing the most undergraduate alumni. The second is the highest share. So I'm going to read their results. I'm going to focus on not the top one because that's just going to bias larger schools. I'm going to focus on the top feeders adjusted for undergraduate enrollment. So this is the order from 1 to 30. And it is true, most of these are brand names. This is Wall Street jobs. So I don't want to give the illusion that a lot of these companies don't primarily recruit from these companies. So number 1 was UPenn, number 2 Harvard, 3 Columbia, 4 University of Chicago, 5 Williams, 6 Dartmouth, 7 Georgetown, 8 Yale, 9 Middlebury, 10 Princeton, 11 Duke, 12 Claremont McKenna, 13 Amherst, 14 Notre Dame, 15 Cornell, 16 Washington and Lee, 17 Brown, 18 Emory, 19 Northwestern, 20 Bowdoin, 21 Stanford, 22 Boston College, 23 Vanderbilt, 24 Swarthmore College, 25 MIT, 26 NYU, 27 SMU in Dallas. They've got a really great connections with Jeffries and Moels. 28 Washington, St. Louis, 29 USC, 30 UVA. So these are prestigious, highly selective schools. But even there, if I was to say to people, name who you think are the T20 schools, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily mention Claremont McKenna, Swarthmore College, SMU, and some others. And most importantly, it's not the only place that they hire from. I think that's the most important to know. Like I said, I've got a student from Georgia that's going on Wall Street right now, and other places as well. So is there truth that the Wall Street community hires at a higher percentage from certain brand name schools? Yes, that is true. And I always talk to people when I'm talking in the context of name, I will usually differentiate 3 professions that are very brand name conscious. The number 1 is the whole investment banking, Wall Street world. Number 2 are some of the elite consulting companies like McKinsey. And 3 are white shoe law firms, but that's more your law school degree. It's very much true that some of these elite corporate firms like to hire from 20 law firms, And in fact, I remember having a conversation way back, geez, a long time ago, but this was, I can tell you how long ago it was because I remember Karis was in kindergarten and she's going to be 29 by the time you hear this. So 24 years ago. And it was a parent who used to like to pick my brain about college all the time. And she was like really, really obsessed with name and this. And then at one point I asked her about that because, generally that's not my philosophy. You guys know that. And she said, you have to understand, like, my company only recruits from 20 law firms. So I wouldn't have got in if I didn't go to Georgetown, which is fortunately one of the 20. So I am not trying to say that never exists ever out there at all. And there certainly are individual people on any individual basis can have their own bias toward those kinds of schools. But so I'm trying to strike balance in this conversation. But the most important thing is you don't have to go to one of 20. I just gave you the top 30 right there. And there's lots of names that are not even on there. I've had conversations about this topic with 3 different attorneys that I've worked with in the last 3 years, and all 3 have told me that things are really changing and changing in a very dramatic way when it comes to exclusively focusing on T20 schools for certain legal jobs. So there's where they recruit from, and there's where the highest percentage of people come from. Those are 2 completely separate questions. One thing that colleges know is there's talent resides in a lot of places. And one thing I always like to tell students and families is that what the perception is of a top T20 school is in some ranking list or public kid chatter on websites is not always exactly the same as what employers know are very, very reputable places that send lots of places to those schools. For example, I never mentioned IU Kelly School on there. They didn't make the top 30, but they send lots of kids. It's another place. So in reality, the list is a lot longer than 20. It's actually longer than 50, but are there a higher percentage from certain schools? Yes. Is it harder, particularly getting into New York? Yes. I remember working with a client a few years ago, worked with 2 of their kids, and the dad worked in Wall Street, and his son really liked Michigan and Michigan State. But the dad said, I'm going to tell you, the New York banks will take Michigan. If you want to go to Chicago, Michigan State's got great connection into the Chicago banks, but Michigan State doesn't have the connections into the New York banks. And so some, coming from someone who works on Wall Street. So, that kind of thing you can look at. Bottom line is talk to schools, talk to their career center and ask for the data. That's something people can do. I don't think they always realize they can do. You can go reach out to career centers. You can also reach out to the Department of Institutional Research and see what data they have on graduates going into whether, investment banking. Like that data is the kinds of things schools track. And so check it out for your kids' schools. But hopefully, Diana, we answered this question. Anything else you want to add, Jen?
I think you got it all. I would say that, I think it goes back to finding the right school, and the careers are important, but you also have to look, I'm big on the whole child, and I'm super happy with where my son is at. And I think all those other qualitative pieces that his school brings to him are going to measure up in the career. It's all those things that his college brings to him that are going to bring value to who he is in the career. So yeah, it may not be one of those colleges on that list, but that his college brings so much more to him that is going to add value. And it's all about that fit and that whole child.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is, if you don't have the fit, then you're not going to be successful and you're not going to get the opportunities anyway.
Correct.
You don't get these opportunities just because you go to one of these schools. It's still, even at these schools, the percentage of people that actually get the opportunity is not really high.
Correct.
But, I notice like Williams, a lot of kids that go to Williams want to go into this field. So there's a lot of people interviewing for those spots, much more so than at some other cultures. So hopefully this was helpful. Thank you, Diane, for a great question. Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Jen Mandel. Hope you join us next week for the next session. And thanks to the generosity of the Princeton Review for sending in that SpeakPipe question, you are going to get your choice of one of the following 4 books: College Admissions 101, Essays That Kicked Apps, The Best 390 Colleges, Princeton Review Digital SAT Prep. Now, in order to get your book, you just need to send me an email at mark@schoolmatch4u.com, put Princeton Book Giveaway in the subject line, and in the body of the email, put the title of the book you want and put the episode number where we discussed your question, and just share a brief description of the question that you asked.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, and in the final part of my interview with Dr. Bob McMahan, president of Kettering University, Bob tells us what Kettering University needs to do to become an even better school. Bob tells us what is keeping presidents up at night these days. So we get off the topic of Kettering and just talk about the national landscape. Bob tells us what public school presidents worry about and how what private school presidents worry about oftentimes has a different set of unique challenges that keep them up at night. And finally, Bob goes on the hot seat in our lightning round. Listen and enjoy. So what does Kettering need to do to be an even better institution? Nobody's perfect. We know that. Everybody has areas to improve, to grow. What are the things Kettering needs to work on to go to the next level?
One of the things we need to work on is we need to constantly evolve the institution. I mean, that's something that's an ongoing process for us because we really strive to be relevant and to understand the dynamics of the markets around us. And sometimes, sometimes as hard as we try, sometimes our curriculum lags that a little bit, and we have to move that. So we're constantly working in that area. And to the point that you made earlier, we are working very hard to let people know about us and what we represent, because I think this is actually this institution and what we do actually speaks to what a lot of people are looking for if they knew it was here, and so that awareness is something that we are constantly working on right now.
And sometimes it just takes time, right? Like you explained it well. I've seen this with other people I interview that I'm like, your school is amazing, but nobody's heard of you. And a lot of times it's like, you know what, we just recently started taking marketing seriously, like we just didn't before. And a lot of times there are very, very good reasons why people have not heard of schools that are fantastic.
Yeah.
I have to ask you a non-Kettering question.
Yes, sir.
You're only the third or fourth president that I've interviewed. And I like to ask presidents, what are you, as you interact with other presidents, what are the things that are keeping people awake at night right now? What are the challenges, you feel presidents are facing? Because you have that big macro view that not everybody gets. If I interview a financial aid person or even a VP of enrollment, a VP of enrollment has a bigger lens than even a dean of admission, because they may be over retention, or sometimes athletics falls under that VP of enrollment role. So they have a pretty broad view, but sometimes they're not always aware of the intricacies of what's going on everyday life in the street, and like the admissions people are. So everybody's got different perspective. But presidents, you guys have this big macro view, and I'm not necessarily asking you this about Kettering, just as you talk with presidents in general, like what are the challenges that you feel presidents say they're facing right now?
Well, are we on the record or off the
record? whatever you're okay with our listeners hearing. We love transparency at your College Bound Kid. I'll say that.
Presidents in general, and I think the answer will vary a little bit between private university presidents and public university presidents. But I think presidents in general are really concerned now about the kind of the evolving attitude towards higher education in our country. There's a growing sense, challenging value, challenging with all these things is a healthy thing, but it's also true that there is enormous evidence to show that engaging with college and getting that post-secondary education, whatever form it is a valuable and lifelong skill that pays dividends over your entire career and over your entire life. And so I think what concerns a lot of presidents right now is the nature of the conversation that's occurring in the U.S. around higher ed, and we work very hard to dispel some of those concerns. And
you're talking about higher ed, is it worth it, and how more and more people are questioning that, especially males, and especially even more so in conservative circles. Surveys indicate there are a lot more people surveys indicate, I don't know if it's worth it, where before that was unquestioned. I thought you might also be going in the direction of the autonomy of colleges is also under assault,
Yes, yes, it
and that's
is.
another thing.
And the funding
That,
mechanisms for
yeah,
college, the way that and how they govern themselves, and all of these issues are all in flux right now, and that creates it's a challenging environment.
keeps you with the job.
It keeps you at the job. It keeps you awake at
Yeah,
night. Both of
I'm
those
sure.
things.
Last thing, I really liked how you kind of saw a distinction between public and private, but I don't feel
Mhm.
you've necessarily unpacked what you were referring to there. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, what are the distinctions you see more on the public side versus the private side?
Well, public education, of course, is typically publicly
Yeah,
subsidized education. And so the economics of public institutions are fundamentally different in a lot of ways than the economics of private
sure.
institutions.
Less reliance on endowment, more state and
Less
federal funding as your core source
funding.
of funding. Yeah,
That's right. And reflecting that, some of the policymakers in various areas of the country are kind of reflecting that difference and saying, well, our job as a state is only public education. And and in those areas, I think that does the ecosystem of opportunities for students a disservice. And you would expect me to say that as a private institution lead, but private institutions everywhere make up a very important, and I would argue critical part of the educational spectrum of opportunities for students. Because not every student, at the low level, not no, lowest level, not every student is suited to a campus with 40,000 students on it.
sure.
Right? So, many students, and we see increasing trends in this direction. In fact, many families are now seeking out smaller institutions just because they can have the kinds of one-on-one and personalized interactions with the institution that they cannot get at a larger institution. I did my own undergraduate work at a large institution. I met the president of the university twice. Once at the freshman reception, and once when I shook his hand on the commencement stage. In an institution like this one, I meet the students all the time. I am over in the coffee shop. When I'm over there, I buy them coffee. We sit down, we talk. I hear what they're thinking. And if there's a student that has a medical problem, or needs counseling, or needs help with academics, this student is not student 3-265. This student is Mary or Joe. The student is personal to us, and we can do that because we are small. So I think there's a trend, and those institutions tend towards the privates in our country. So there's a real there's a very important part of the educational opportunity spectrum that is filled by private institutions, and I think not always do policymakers see that, and they paint higher education with a very broad brush. We're all the same. Yeah, I hear it on TV all the time. Universities. Well, there are a lot of different kinds of
Sure,
universities.
sure.
It's kind of like saying birds.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
are we talking about Andean condors, or are we talking about sparrows? Which one? Because the logic is very different, and so are the outcomes. So
I would think birth dearth and Roman cliff, all that stuff is probably stuff that's, talked about as well, changing demographic trends, people having less
absolutely,
kids and all of that, is a,
the demographic
yeah,
cliff, all of these things are all part of that, are all part of how we are planning in the long term, and what it means for institutions broadly. But yeah, it is a challenging time in higher education, but I have to say it's never been more important.
hmm. Well, the one good thing about higher ed is there's still a lot of parents that you and I would be examples that higher ed was transformational for us, and we saw great value in, and
Yeah.
we want that for our kids.
Yeah.
There's still this very strong belief there. It's more challenging with first gen and rural and communities that don't have a college culture, penetrating that. But you do have a
Right.
built-in pipeline of people who feel like, and I'm thinking about myself, like every single job I've ever had since graduating from college, I couldn't have never had it without my college degree.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of different things. They've
Likewise.
all
Yeah.
required that, right? And so that's just that aspect of it. Then there's the other aspects, like how you grow as a person and how you develop your critical thinking skills, and the people that you meet and become more interesting. Like there's other tangential benefits that are even outside of ones related to the money you make and the job that you have.
I would say to parents when they're here on the first year, I always look at them and I said, you're not actually, given the fact that our students are not only going through that process, but also through the professional side of it as well. I always say to parents, I said, you're not going to recognize the person that walks through the door in a year.
Mm-hmm. The growth.
And that's from the growth. And it's very true.
Yeah. Awesome. And back in the day, there used to be a little more focus on that. I had someone say to me recently, the rising cost of college has forced us to think a little bit more transactionally now, that we need to, feel like we're getting the financial ROI, where back in the day, a lot of people weren't even necessarily thinking as much of the career aspect. A lot of it was some of these other benefits of discover yourself and your voice and figure out what your passions are and meet interesting people. But it's both and, right? It's the growth.
It's both.
It's both.
And that's that having that orientation is not necessarily bad. I just had an article put in U.S. News on this very subject. It's both. It is, but it is both, meaning you can't ignore either half. And you really, I think parents and families are wisely starting to make more informed, selections based on not just the immediate. Do I like the football colors? But, okay, what does this mean for me 5, 10, 15 years out? And does it put me in a place that starts me on a path that I can see myself? Those are often more challenging conversations, but for an institution like ours, they actually aren't, because we have seen this path and we help build the path actively with students as they're moving through the college process.
So we're about to wind down in what we call our lightning round, our hot seat, and ask you some non-Kettering questions. I have one Kettering question and then a few others. But before we do, is there anything we haven't said about Kettering, Dr. McMahan, that you want to make sure that we, don't depart without making sure it's included?
No, it's been a very complete conversation. I really have enjoyed this. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very
I
much
have
for the
too.
opportunity. No, this has been good.
Yeah. No, I think, you have a very exciting institution, and we love introducing exciting institutions that may not be on people's radar to our listeners, which are college counselors and parents and students. All right, lightning round. This is my one Kettering question. What's something that students do that grind your gears? What's your pet peeve that you wish students wouldn't do, or they wouldn't do it so much?
I love this. I'm not gonna answer your question in a way that you want. This is not really. This is not.
You're
really
the president. You can do whatever you want.
I love the students here because like I said, because of their professional experience, they engage their education differently. So when, in a lot of universities, when students come visit the president, they say, the university, we don't like the way the university is doing this, and the university needs to do this better. At Kettering, students come and they say, we don't like the way the university is doing this, and here's the business plan to how the university could change. I love
they come with ideas.
That's right. The thing that really irritates me is the grill club. We were talking about clubs earlier. There's a grill club that loves to, in the nice weather, they cook out for the students. They have this big hibachi down there, and they put it right next to the air intake of the HVA system that feeds my office.
They
So
tantalizing you.
every time they do this grill club, they either smoke me out or make me viciously hungry. That irritates me. But
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. What do you wish your 18-year-old self knew?
patience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Patience. When you're 18 or when you're young, and this is when you're in your 20s too, nothing ever happens fast enough,
Yeah.
and it happens. The dots do connect. It's just when you're young, you want them to connect faster than they naturally do, and that causes a lot of frustration when you're young, and ultimately, uh, but ultimately it works out. But there's a lot of angst in the process because you just want it to happen now. Why can't this enormous organization just change?
Yeah. No, I agree. And something like 3 years feels like eternity when 3 years is
Yeah,
not long
yeah.
at all. Yeah. No, we would see this both when I did boarding school, um, admissions, and adjunct college counseling and diversity work, and the teachers. And then I also worked for KIP for 14 years.
Hmm.
And, the teachers that would come in their 20s, so many of them would bounce after 2 years. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's because they wanted to go to grad school, or sometimes it's because they figured out, okay, this isn't for them. But sometimes it was just because they had this idealistic belief of how things should be,
yeah,
and then it wasn't that way, and then they're like, I don't like this place, and that's just not the kind of thing they would do if they were a little older. They would realize,
yeah.
it's a lot more nuanced. Nothing's perfect. Things take time
That's
to,
right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, how do you chill? How do you relax? How do you unwind? You can't be president all the time.
Me, I love to fly. Flying is
Oh, when
my
you say fly, do you get
avocation.
out and like fly the plane, or do you like to be
Yeah,
on the plane? Oh,
I get out and fly the plane. I love to
wow.
fly. I'm a very, very bad acrobatic pilot.
Gee.
Um, you know, from my perspective in the
Mm-hmm.
plane, the figures that I'm making are perfect. From the people on the ground, not so much. And so, but I just love it. I love
Where'd you learn how to do that?
I've flown since I was in graduate school. I've flown for longer than number of years than I'd like to admit, but it's always been I have my vocation. That's my avocation. I love flying, and just the moving in space, in
What do
free
you fly?
space.
Are you flying?
I right now I fly a Mooney, which is a very fast single engine airplane,
Wow.
and I do a lot of flying for the university. For intermediate ranges, it's much faster just to get in the plane and get there than it is to get to the airport and sit and
Wow.
wait for the plane and go. And
So did you have to go through like a course to get trained on that, or did somebody train you one-on-one? Like, where'd you get the
well,
skill set to do that?
there's a whole licensing process,
Right.
of course. There's a
So
whole
you went through all
education and
that.
license. I
You
went
did
through
all that.
all of that. Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, did
Yeah.
that many years ago. And then
Wow.
there's recurrent training you have to do all the time. And
Wow. Good
as
for you.
as you get older, you have to do it more frequently. And
What's on your bucket list before you move on? What's something you want to do?
one of the things I want to do is stand and look up at the Sistine Chapel ceiling. I have not done that, and that's on my bucket list.
Cool.
But the other thing we love to do, my family, we're avid backcountry hikers. We love to
Oh.
hike in the backcountry, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's still some places in
You do
Alaska.
mountains at all or not?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's some places in Alaska I would love to go. I haven't been there yet, and to hike because we love just getting in the back. Nothing fancy,
Mm-hmm.
but just getting into the backcountry
Mm-hmm.
and experiencing that. We've done over the course of the years, my family, and we've done most of the national parks in the United States,
Oh, good for you.
and just love it. Just love it.
Well, my brother's in Colorado, and every time we come out there, let's do a 14er. I mean, he's
Oh yeah.
he's all into that. It's the culture. Yeah, great.
It is part of the culture out there.
So, Bob, is there a book that you would recommend our listeners read? It really had, you know, impact on you, and you think, gee, a lot of our listeners are mostly parents of 10th, 11th, and 12th graders that are very college-minded. Doesn't have to be about college, but just could be about life. Anything come to mind?
Oh goodness, there are so many. There's so many out there that speak to a lot of the issues we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of jumbled in terms of which ones to talk about. A lot of the stuff that I read is kind of about with respect to college is about college
Sure,
universities and how
sure.
they operate, not necessarily from a parent's perspective. Um, so I'm not sure that I have a good
That's
recommendation.
okay.
Actually,
That's
yeah,
okay.
I'm not sure.
No, you're reading all that educational leadership stuff and moving staff and
Yeah,
you
and I
know,
try
calling stuff and all that stuff probably, and then
and I try not to read that stuff when I'm reading for pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which isn't that often. I don't get to do too much of that, but I try not to go to those sources when I do that. So if you ask me what my current reading list is, it wouldn't have anything to do with
That's
education.
okay. You got a busy job. Last question. What's your advice for students and parents?
uh, that in searching for, in entering this process, is that the question? In entering this process of searching for colleges and admissions or in general?
It really could just be in general, whatever you is on your heart.
There is a wide variety of opportunities out there for students, much in many ways much wider than you think at first blush. There's a lot of diversity in education in the United States and different kinds of opportunities, and that don't take the surface presentation as definitive. So many times with parents that I run into, there's a lot of confusions that they're operating under in terms of things like value and cost and price and scholarships and all these things. It's a complex environment in which families have to operate, and there it isn't always what it seems on the surface. And what I find is with a lot of families, they take kind of they'll look at a college and they'll say, okay, that's their published tuition. So I can't afford that number, so I'm not going to even consider that. But for many students, the reality of what it costs, it's kind of the same as paying MSRP on a car. You don't go into the dealer and do we pay sticker price when we go to the dealer? Very rarely. The financing of an automobile is much more complex than that, and the value equation is much more complex than that. And the same is true of higher education. So don't look at just a simple number like a tuition and make a decision of whether or not this is something that you can afford or not afford, or this is something that is valuable or isn't valuable. The truth lies deeper than that, and so I think that's the one piece of advice I would, because I find so many students and so many families kind of take the surface number, they Google it, and whatever Google puts up there, okay, that they'll make a decision based on that, but that actually doesn't represent the reality of the opportunity and what
No, I
the
mean
true
that's
value
just
is.
good advice in general. A lot of times net price is not real price, but in your
Yes,
case, with all the stuff you're doing with co-op, such a value added, like
yeah,
that has to be factored in to the whole equation rather than just say, oh, it's going to be cheaper for me to go to Michigan State, stay in state or whatever. Yeah, I see why you would say that. And I think that's sage advice for everybody. This has been fantastic, Bob. I greatly appreciate it. If you could just give us the Kettering website in closing,
it
that'd be
is
great.
www.kettering.edu.
And that's KETTERING.
Perfect.
.edu. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate this and excited to
Thank
bring
you.
this interview to our listeners.
Thank you so very much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope it gave you everything that you were hoping to get.
No, exceed it. I mean that. This exceeded my expectations. Listen, Bob, this has been great. You've given me 2 hours of your time. I know as a president, I know how many people are pulling at you and how precious your time is. Our time is the most precious thing we all have here, right?
No, this is a lot of fun. Thank
but
you.
I'm very excited about introducing Kettering to our listenership. So thank you for your generosity.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah. All right, take care. And friends, if you enjoyed this interview with Dr. Bob McMahan or any of our other interviews, we hope you'll take a minute of your time to send them an email. It means the world to them. And if we ever want to have them back, it's a great way. On Monday's episode, I will continue with the final part on my segment on holistic admissions. We'll discuss what other factors can tip a student in besides institutional priorities. I will share another question that came up a few times this year in the counseling room that I hope can help others who have the same question. Julia will join me to answer the final question from Sapna and Sivan. And we will have the final segment of Linda's interview with Jay Hall on the topic of how to successfully transition from high school to college. So friends, you know this is my 4th or 5th time reading Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's the 2nd time I did it by audiobook, and I've done it twice through traditional reading as well. I want to close you with 2 quotes from Dale Carnegie from his 1926 book bestseller that sold like crazy millions of copies. Both of these have to do with happiness. So here's the first one. It isn't what you have or what you are or where you are or what you are doing that makes you happy or unhappy. It is what you think about it. And the second one is similar, just a different twist. Here's a second quote. Everybody in the world is seeking happiness, and there is one sure way to find it. That is by controlling your thoughts. Happiness doesn't depend on outward conditions. It depends on inner conditions. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.